How many of our major agronomic crops can be harvested before their physiological maturity? Alfalfa, grazing crops, wheat, for one. When I think about the economic impact of dual-purpose grazing, I think about risk management in terms of being able to harvest a portion of my crop before it's even reached maturity. Isn't that one of the major reasons why we utilize cattle on our wheat crop? We get to spread out that 9-month growing window for wheat is a rather long time to wait just to harvest grain. And we plant wheat for grazing, and we go through and we look at, how much cattle can we put out there, what's our stocking rate, what's our moisture level, and we graze wheat up through March. And then at that point, we have another decision to make. And we look at the yield potential of that wheat, and a lot of our producers then can also graze it even longer and take it to graze out. So I think about risk management in terms of being that ability to take some income off of that farm before I even get to that June harvest time period. Now look at feeder cattle and just look at prices over time. And again, I don't want you to look at graphs all day here, but this is going back 20 years. I didn't have a chart that go back 30 years, but think about where we've come in terms of cattle prices, and we might have thought cattle prices were rather volatile back in that time period until 2014 and 15 showed up and just squashed all the noise out of those markets. So it's a rather interesting time as managers thinking about how we're going to manage that risk of price. And I'll show you an example from this year that shows that even in unfavorable years where prices move against us, we can still get a relatively good return on those cattle. So this is a graph showing the last 6 months as a percent change in price. And as you can see, whenever we purchased cattle back in the fall, it kind of made a big determination on how much money we ended up making on them throughout the year. So we have about this level holding 6 months ago as a baseline at 0%. We went from anywhere from 1% to 2% higher from that time period all the way up to as high as 6% higher as cattle prices increased through October. And as we were going through that time, we had conversations with producers about if you're buying cattle in that early October time period, you really have to start thinking about if we're going to hedge these animals, because we can't imagine that this strength in the market is going to maintain. And we saw a huge break after that and fell down. And as we get here towards time where we're going to be selling these animals, we're somewhere around 2 to 3% lower than we were 6 months ago. So you add up that total spread, and we can look almost a 9% decrease in prices just from market movements alone. So again, that comes into play when we think about these cattle, especially nowadays. It's more of a struggle than it's ever been when we think about how we need to hedge these cattle. It's not just throw them out on wheat, run them all winter and make money. We really have to do a little bit more than that. So what is economic impact? I thought about how I wanted this talk to go, and I'm going to talk quite a bit about just the budgets. But I think about dual-purpose grazing in Oklahoma and its major impact on our producers. If you can see this is a black baldy calf with some Hereford mamas, and I thought that was a pretty good financial analogy, thinking about staying in the black in a sea of red. So I think about how our producers are trying to make money through these low crop price times, and cattle are the major way that a lot of our producers have been able to continue to make money. This is a graph. I know it's hard to see. Blue on black wasn't a good choice. But you look over here, this is planted acres, lowest we've seen since about 100 years. Okay? So what producers are still planting wheat? Do you think about that? You think about if we have planted acres coming down this low and prices are this low, what proportion of those acres are being grazed? And I would guess it's a vast majority of them, especially in Oklahoma. So again, the ability to even plant as much wheat as we have, even though it's at this long-term low in terms of planted acres, the ability to plant as much as we have has to do with cattle. And they've allowed us to continue utilizing wheat in Oklahoma instead of having to move to other options in order to make money. Looking at dual pasture wheat costs, I put up here 30 pounds of N, and of course we've seen fertilizer prices go up quite a bit this year, so this is a moving target. But $15 an acre about covers liquid N at 50 cents per pound of actual nitrogen and $5 to apply it, so that's 20 bucks and roughly 5 bushel reduction in yield. I'm glad you used 6 because that means I'm pretty close there. And you value that somewhere at prices that are highly variable for wheat grain, but I'm going to put $20 there. $40 to graze. are there any other costs associated with running cattle on wheat in terms of putting the wheat in the ground and growing it? You think about cash flow concerns. We have to put nitrogen out a little bit earlier because we're going after a little bit higher forage production in the wintertime, so that affects our cash flow. There's not necessarily a whole lot else we have to do. If we're going to be planting wheat for grain, we can graze it for just about the same cost. So I think about these costs are really the differences that we have, the major costs associated with grazing, that reduction in yield, the cost of nitrogen, and any hedging costs that your individual operation has to deal with. So looking at dual pasture wheat revenue, assuming 1 calf per 2 acres, gaining 250 pounds, that's 125 pounds per acre. To cover those costs, we convert that down to somewhere around 32 cents per pound. As Dr. Horn said, we've seen value of gains anywhere from 50 cents per pound all the way up to $1.25 depending on the year, and that's a highly variable thing. This year it's a little bit lower due to that reduction in prices that we saw. And I'll give you an example. This is a real-world example. Going back to September 3rd, 523-pound calves were bringing $1.64, and on March 1st, 770-pound calves were selling for $1.39. So we look at what really happened throughout this year. With that level of gain on those cattle, we saw a value of gain of 85 cents per pound. So rather low compared to what we've seen in some years, unhedged cattle just open to the market running on wheat, but they still are going to cover those costs that we talked about earlier, so they still are making money. And another big impact we think about when we talk about dual purpose enterprises is that those cattle can be anywhere from 25% to 75% of the total revenue in a wheat budget given the year. And that's pretty big impact when you think about how much money we're getting off of these cattle and how we make our farms run by diversifying our operations. So the 2018-19 grazing season presented marketing challenges. Value of gain at 85 cents per pound still covers those top dress costs. And again, you think about how bad it could have got, and we still would have been able to relatively make most of our money back with prices coming down almost 10%. We have a net revenue there of 53 cents per pound to cover other costs associated with this production system. Diversified production systems continue to strengthen Oklahoma's farm economy. And I would say, again, over the last few years with agronomic prices being so bad that the cattle on wheat, especially the farther west we go, are what's keeping a lot of people in business. So with that, I burned through there thinking we could get done pretty quick. Anybody have any questions about what's happened this year? Any ideas? You guys are cold. You don't care. Well, that's kind of what we do. I'll throw in another joke since you guys didn't talk. I noticed Scott showed up here today, and I was thinking, I get asked to talk about stocker cattle. I got to wonder what country Dr. Peel's traveling to. Does anybody know? Or is he sitting in Stillwater today? I think he was a smart one. Well, all right, with that, we're always here to provide budgeting and things like that. If you guys are thinking about adding cattle or you want to talk about hedging opportunities or marketing strategies or things like that, our office is always open, along with most of your county agents can help you with some of that. We're always here to discuss it, but we're here to talk about or look at wheat plots and things like that. So I'm going to sit down, and thanks for having me.